how does the space where both of us are working together in the same house, so being married, so to speak, influence your creative process, Yann?
Well, it's nice to be with someone who understands what I'm doing, who understands the importance of culture, writing, imagination. That means there's a sort of a synergy that settles into the house. We both understand the creative process, what is needed by each of us, the space we need, the understanding we need. Yeah, it's nice. It creates, as I said, a synergy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, right now you're working on some edits for me. So one of the questions we've been looking at is whether we share drafts or what that process looks like. And I'd say it's changed. Hey, we've been together 20 years now. It depends, book by book. So for this book, you're reading a couple of chapters and you're helping me out. But what's that like for you?
Well, you're much more prolific than I am, so I see your stuff more often than you see mine. Well, it's a supportive process, right? We read each other's stuff, we know each other, we know what we're intending. So it's a very supportive editorial relationship, I would say. Like right now, I'm reading the chapters of your murder mystery, and I'm going very particular, very sort of line edit kind of stuff, because I think that's where you're at with that. And being a writer myself, I can sort of, see what I think works on the page and what doesn't. And I can, tailor it in relation to what I think you want from this story. So in a sense, like any editor, you place yourself in the space of the ideal reader. And I think it's easier because we know each other so well.
I think one of the things we've had to do too is not really say, well, if I was writing it, I would write it like this. Yeah. If it was my book, that can be a little bit harder, right, to step back from.
That will be harder for us because we know each other so well, whereas a true professional editor will know not to do that, because first of all, they're not usually writers, whereas we're both writers. But we know that too. We know that you're trying to make me do this, but I don't want to, and we both get that.
I think I've been a little harsh sometimes too. Hey?
No, it's whatever.
This is so boring.
Yeah. Wait till you hear what I have to say about your book.
I know, right? I haven't even opened your edits yet.
I'll stick it back at you.
So the next question is, have you ever considered co-writing a project together?
Personally, no. No, because what's wonderful about being a writer is you become like a small god. You create a world, you do everything. And to co-create a world seems like an odd thing. You don't have co-gods. You have gods in the Greek mythology, but they each have their own separate universes, right? Poseidon is the ocean, Zeus is the earth, Hades is the underworld. Each has their specificity, their area where they are gods. I think writers are the same thing. I'm quite happy doing everything, from the research to the writing to the rewriting. The idea of sharing that wouldn't work for me personally. Yeah. I know some art forms are more, like playwriting is more cooperative, making movies is more cooperative. Everyone has their say that may affect everything else. But writing, you really create the entirety of the things. You're much more collaborative. So
yeah, no, I like it and I like the idea. I've never done it. And I don't know that you and I would, I mean, we live together, we have children together.
You did it with Art Slade for a while.
Yeah, I've done some stuff with him, and I do lots of sort of co-creation in the work at the Novelry where I'm doing things, but I think there's something nice, living together, having children together, about not maybe sharing that piece so entirely.
And also, that's true. And also, the fact is, we write very different things. Right now, you're working on a murder mystery. I'm just finishing a book set during the Trojan War. So they don't necessarily...
I'd only had maybe your collaboration right now, you're working with an illustrator. I've had that type of relationship where you have an illustrator who's bringing a piece that neither of us can do, right? So that's really interesting. You're right.
That's, my next novel has a few illustrations and an illustrator is creating them. But when they said collaborator, I thought they meant both people writing.
I think you're right. For us, I don't think it's something we want to do.
Yeah.
How do you navigate creative differences at home? Is there a no literary talk at dinner rule, or does storytelling seep into everyday life? Can you imagine if there was a rule like that? Who would follow the rule?
Well, you know what, I'm not
None of our children follow rules anyway.
Yeah, and to be honest, they're not particularly impressed that we're writers.
They don't care.
They don't care. And also, I'm not much of a shop talker anyway. Some people
I
love
talk shop all the time.
Yeah, you like that. I like, but it doesn't bother me. But I have less interest in talking about it, in part because we work on different projects. The children are not interested particularly. Well, that's not true. They are interested and they are proud of what we do, but they're not obviously interested at the dinner table talking about editing or sequence or plotting. But yeah,
I'd say the dinner table looks a lot like The children all speaking loudly to be heard, me really nagging everybody to just sit down and finish their dinner. I wouldn't say there's much of anything other than like, what's happening tonight? Are we going to sports?
No, they sometimes get on little things like Brawl Star or whatever, some sort of video game. But there's not much shop talking, but that doesn't mean because we're not interested, just that we put all our creativity in writing what we do. And I, less than you, don't really need to talk about it, but you enjoy it more because you're very collaborative. Like all you do at the novelry necessarily involves a lot of talking and exteriorizing what happens on the inside.
I'd add that we do like crosswords. We have played Scrabble lots in the past. You grew up in a literary family, right? Your parents traveled all over the world. They worked as translators. There was lots of talk about writing and books.
He won the Government General's Prize for Poetry. And your parents read too a lot. So yeah, obviously writing, I think art comes out of somewhere. Some artists come out of nothing, but most of them come out of a family milieu. And so both of our families are well-read, respect the imagination. And I'm sure children will be the same too. Our daughter Lola loves editing, loves reading and editing.
I think too, one of the things really just in honor of your parents, like your mum was always very interested in the stories of other people. She worked in immigration, helping families come to Canada, is very proud of that work, even as she has dementia and loses all of her stories. That's something she really remembers. Absolutely. Your father loved to read work of writers from all over the world, to hear their stories. He worked extensively with Penn Quebec. So you've always had this kind of base in a literary community, right?
And an international one. My parents translated from French into English, from English into French, from Spanish into French.
Yeah.
So they translated a lot of, for example, Latin American poets. So yeah, that's true. There is more, and sometimes, in many ways, I talked with my parents often about that, but more in a sort of what we've read rather than what we're writing.
Yeah. And the other thing you read quite a lot is Asymptote, right? The magazine, and sometimes the books there that you get to see that are inspired, that you wouldn't maybe have noticed, because they're books in translation, is that right?
Asymptote's an extraordinary internet magazine that is about literatures translated into English. So, experimental Bulgarian poets, Tuareg playwrights, just everything from everywhere that isn't written in English, but translated into English. So it brings to light writers that most people have never heard of, because English dominates so much. It's spoken by so many people, such a wonderfully vital language, that it tends to sometimes squash other literatures. And Asymptote brings that out. It's a wonderful magazine.
So the theme of this conference is reimagining, and it often involves seeing the world through new perspectives. So we've talked a little bit about cultural learning, but whether through travel or research or personal relationships, how has that reshaped your storytelling?
Well, it hasn't reshaped it, it's shaped it. My parents were diplomats. They worked for Canada's Foreign Service, so I spent a lot of years abroad being immersed in foreign cultures. So I lived in France, in Costa Rica, in Spain, in Mexico. Necessarily, you see how those people are, and it's wonderful to do that. To me, there's only two ways to learn. You either travel or you read. Those are two ways of experiencing the other. And so having the luck of living in foreign countries, seeing how people speak, how they dress, how they move, how they are, is extraordinarily enriching. So I'm not a travel writer, but all the travels I've done have infused my writing. Obvious example, Life of Pi, set in India, featuring an Indian boy. That was the result of 2 backpacking trips for 6 months in India. I was so intoxicated by India that it just triggered my imagination. I wrote this story that isn't necessarily about India, but certainly was inspired by India. And the same thing with you. You've traveled lots. You can't help but be electrified by what's out there.
I am going to add one thing though, because I think when you talk about travel or reading, you neglect like museums, galleries, and I think like for example, in Saskatoon, the Ukrainian Museum, the Rime Art Gallery, like these spaces, the Western Development Museum, where we can kind of learn and see other ways of being in the world. Those are great ways to travel and learn culturally.
I said reading, I mean art and travel, the two ways to experience oneself, one's humanity, and that of others. So absolutely not. In fact, when I travel, I deliberately go out of my way to go to museums. I just recently was with Lola and Felix, 2 of our children, went to LA, and we did, in 4 days we did 3 museums.
They were delighted.
Well, the Automobile Museum is certainly one. And they actually liked the Getty Museum. They did like the Getty Center.
How has engaging with other cultures, and we've talked about this a bit, directly or through literature, challenged or reinforced your understanding of your own cultural identity?
Well, that's the great thing about traveling, is in seeing the other, you kind of see who you are by comparison. for better and for worse. You know, things that we lose in our culture or that have been lost, and as opposed to things that this other culture has more naturally. You know, we live in a very technological society, a slightly atomized society, a society that works too much perhaps, so that has consequences. You go to other cultures that maybe are more relaxed, maybe are more family oriented, maybe have less, and because they have less materially, they spend more in social terms. So I've always found traveling, in a sense, a discovery of oneself. Yes, you discover the other, but in doing that, you discover yourself. And that very much influences how we write. And, you know, in traveling, you learn. I mean, the very obvious thing, for example, is food. You go to India, you say, oh my God, I love their food. And so you eat more Indian food in Canada. You go to Indian restaurants, ways of dressing.
It's interesting what you say about food, because for me, food is often a very good cultural lens. Like I'm always taking us when we go traveling, I'm like, let's do a cooking lesson. And so the kids and Yann and I will try a cooking lesson and learn to cook a different food. But like when we were in Mexico recently, in Oaxaca, we went through the market and we were shown all these foods that I don't think we'd even seen some of them before, let alone knew the names. But we also met the people who had like harvested the foods and created the foods. And I think, I mean, we see that in Saskatoon too. That relationship with food has changed a lot, and we get to know the landscape and the land. There's a new really interesting movement here with indigenous cooking and that relationship with like herbs and foliage and foresting. Foliage, maybe not foliage, but like just thinking about how we bring from the land and what we eat, and how land and place shape who you are, right?
Exactly. And in exploring that, it's so enriching. There's no threat there. That people are different is not a problem, it's a blessing. It enriches us, it makes us hybrids. In fact,
I noticed what you said about atomized, right? When we're in a sort of soapbox of like, these are the things that my friends think, and these are the things that this is normal. In fact, we were talking about this with drinking, and I was like, well, it's sort of normal. In Britain, it's very normal to drink excessively often, certainly in my experience, and that's not the same in other cultures. And so holding that lens up and saying, you know, is that actually good? Is it healthy?
Exactly.
Just because it's normal in my culture, is it necessarily something I could maybe learn from the opportunity of encountering other cultures?
Exactly.
I'm so fascinated out in Wanuskewin, our beautiful local, incredible heritage site here in Saskatoon. There's a little video, and I can only say a little bit about it because I was with the children. I didn't get enough time to look at it properly, but it's talking about the star language of the Cree people. And I so want to just go out there and sit and learn and understand even what that means, to think about language so differently. You speak three, right? I don't. But to think about what a star language is and like what that means on the page, and like that visual. So I think it's a visual representation that every time you look at it, you learn something new. But even that, it's inspiring in a way of like, oh, there's things I just don't know about the world, right?
And since you mentioned Wanuskewin, that's a perfect example of what seeing the other, how it changes us. When I first moved to Saskatchewan 20 years ago, the term settler colonial didn't exist. And suddenly now it's so part of our culture now. So you go to Wanuskewin and you see how the Indigenous people have such a radically different relationship with the world than we do. You know, we compartmentalize the world, we divide it up, we treat the world as if it's a commodity that can be bought and sold. The Indigenous people of the world, not just of Canada, see that radically different. It's a question of sharing, of not exploiting, of living with, not living against. And that is something you need to learn. And we learned it right here.
Right? Like a
listening
that I notice is very different from
and here they are right around us. And so now I totally consider myself settler colonial for bad, but also for good. I mean, there's a sort of learning from them, they learn from us. It's a living together and enriching us mutually without all becoming homogeneous in one unique mass. You know, another example, for example, of differences enriching is languages. Each language, in a sense, does what it needs to do. It explains the world, it lets you access it, but it does it sometimes in very different ways. And to see that, to observe it, is wonderfully, once again, enriching.
And I think it comes from the history too, like when you talk about that kind of back and forth relationship, really, certainly I've been taught to think about it as we are all treaty people, and so what does that mean when we're in that relationship both ways? Understanding too, there's such a history of harm, and what do you do to navigate and move forward, and you can't do that unless you listen. It's funny,
and
the word,
in the spirit of truth and reconciliation and respect. Absolutely, which is the same thing with all travel. If you travel and judge, you're not traveling. You have to be open to, yes, there are things that are bad in other societies as there are in ours, but that's not the only thing there. You look for the positive, and you can only do that in a spirit of respect.
So this goes a little bit back now towards the personal. The conversation is moving that way. It says here, as our next question, are there themes or ideas you've inspired in each other's work, knowingly or unknowingly? Unknowingly would be hard to answer.
Well, in one obvious way, yes. For example, my next novel, Son of Nobody, which was inspired by the Iliad and the Trojan War, came as a result of you suggesting that I read the Iliad. I was very familiar with the Trojan War, but I never actually read the original text. And even better than that, you'd suggested a particular translation by Stephen Mitchell.
Because I tried a whole bunch that just killed me.
That are deadening academic translations. The Stephen Mitchell translation of the Iliad is so lovely, so fast, so fluid, so lean and mean. And you're the one who suggested that, and I read that and it blew me away. And the result is, 4 or 5 years later, this novel, Son of Nobody. So there's a very obvious case of influence. I'm not sure I've ever inspired you to write anything.
You inspire me every day, love.
Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of specific ideas, I'm trying to think if I actually... No, I said creation is a very private thing. So you have your interests, like a lot of your YA novels, for example.
How about my murder mystery? You think I was inspired by you?
Wanting to kill me, maybe. Yeah. I mean, the fact is I love Agatha Christie, but I don't think that was it. You just naturally moved towards that.
I think in the conversations I notice and hear things, you know, like the way that ideas come, and this is maybe interesting for someone who's thinking about where do ideas come from for my own writing. I want to write, but I don't know where to start. Often it's just a tiny glimmer, right? And you're like, I wonder where this would go.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily need more than that. Like, it doesn't need to be a whole novel. It doesn't need to be even a finished page. It just needs something to just start getting it alight. And I think the mistake with ideas is to hold them up as too silly or too ridiculous or too ambitious or too anything. And so I think both of us are quite good. You know, if you're sitting making notes, like we were sitting at a local cafe, Delish, and suddenly you're making notes, right? I know that you're just having an idea. It might come to nothing. It might come to something. It doesn't matter. It's valuable just in and of itself, right?
Yeah, witnessing each other's process is enriching. Like, I do a lot of research, you do less, you work intensely, you're very much more structured than I am. I'm much more spontaneous in the way I approach it while doing a lot of research. Like, witnessing that, in a sense, I think we influence each other in a positive way of saying this is a worthy activity. It's a very stimulating one. It's very exciting to be creating something out of nothing. So that way we influence each other. The way of directly inspiration, I don't know, like you wrote that one of your YA books was about music and songwriting, and you did a lot of research on that. And that was interesting to me because I'm not familiar with that creative process of songwriting, and you really delved into that. That I remember being interested in.
That was Me and Me. I'm trying to remember the title.
The one where the
yeah, no,
lark,
you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's Me and Me.
Lark. Yeah. In Me and Me, Lark is a songwriter.
She's songwriting all over the house. Yeah.
She's part of a band. It was interesting to see that come to life.
So the next question is, and usually, not to be rude, but this question gets asked only of women. Raising a family while both being professional writers must be an interesting balancing act. How do you carve out time and space for writing? So usually as the mom, I get asked this a lot, which I don't mind, but I do notice male writers don't get asked this as much. Well, so tell me, how do you manage?
Well, I think the answer. Yeah. No, I think it goes for both ways.
Yes, it does. You are very supportive.
You become, no, but I think you become more efficient. Before you have children, you have all the time in the world. Whereas suddenly when you have children, you start realizing, oh, I only have 3 hours or 2 hours, and suddenly you tend to focus more.
Well, you have work, you have other commitments, but it's all absorbed once you have children. Hey, like there's just not even that spare 5 minutes or that, like the window for dreaming closes a little. Hey, where you're like, I'm going to look out the window and just think about my book for 5 minutes, or on the train, I'm going to think about it as I'm commuting back and forth from work or whatever. That's all gone.
But I also think, yes, we lose time, but we gain depth in the sense that what's great about having children is it truly roots us to life.
For us, not for everybody. Like, not everybody needs that, but for us, I think so, yeah.
But I mean, one way of is a book can always, the writing of it can always wait. Well, sometimes a child can't wait. So there is a reality, and you don't have to have children. It could be a relative, a stranger on the street who's injured.
Or community, like a connection with something that roots you. The call of a real
person calls you away from your art. And that is sometimes a good thing because it relativizes the art, because after all, art has a social purpose. Art is for communicating with others. Well, the other is important, therefore. And so having children, just as having friends, lovers, family, and all that, we are a social species. Art ultimately serves a purpose.
We're not allowed lovers anymore, right?
Right, we're not lovers. before
That's
we
it.
got
That
together.
was before 20 years ago. Yeah.
All the art serves to ultimately communicate with those people.
What lessons do you hope your children take from growing up in a literary household?
Oh, that's easy. The importance of being creative. The saddest thing is people who don't have imagination, only in the sense that then they can't change their lives. You are not what you are. You are partly what you are, but you're also what you want to be. And to figure out what you want to be, you have to have ideas. You have to have dreams. And so I think our children see us create ideas, create dreams. So that's very important to them, I think, so that they have that imaginative landscape where they can pick and choose what they want reality to be like. Because reality ultimately comes out from how we look at it, how we want to see it, and that comes from having ideas. So I think they will respect the creative process. Even Thea, who's more of an engineering science kind of kid, I think will understand the importance of creativity, and therefore that will make him, if he becomes an engineer, a better engineer.
I think engineers have to be creative. I think there's
and absolutely, but
kind of a flexibility, right?
Yeah, he'll more explicitly understand the need of imagination and creativity for having seen his parents do that. And also, it's just wonderful. One of the things I love doing with my children is reading to them. And they love
you're
it
really
too.
good at that.
I love reading to my children because it's so exciting hearing stories. It's so not only entertaining, you learn from them. You learn how to
What
be
are the
differently.
best books in the world?
Well, right now I'm reading a series called The 39 Clues, which is
straight
10
up,
volumes.
It's the Babysitter's Club.
Oh, the Babysitter's Club. That's also very good too.
The graphic novels. You love those.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so you're now based in Canada, but you're originally English. How has that influenced your writing, the fact that you're English here in Canada?
So when I first moved to Saskatoon, I wasn't a writer who thought about place very much. I didn't think about setting. And I remember talking with the writer David Carpenter, a wonderful local writer, about this notion that setting wasn't really important to me, and him being not only surprised but perturbed and really talking to me about how vital setting is in his work and how much it's rooted his storytelling, how he couldn't really imagine storytelling without place. My first published book, Life on the Refrigerator Door, was published as notes and is set anywhere, like any fridge, any mum, any daughter. It's been made into plays all over the world, most recently in Tahiti, which is quite lovely and surprising. But I think that's because it's really about that relationship and it's not got a setting. So it doesn't always have to be the case that a novel or a story needs place, but as I've spent longer here, each of my books have become more and more about place. So the one I'm writing now, whilst the town itself is fictional, it's rooted in place, in a settler colonial landscape, looking at the lives that we live with. That's what the murder mystery is about. And so the place of it is really important. And so interestingly, the editor who has read it, so this is, this would be my 15th published book, if it ever gets published, the editor's focus really was how ably I'm handling setting and place. So it's become a journey where I've really worked on learning that, but I think when you kind of skim the stones of place and don't root in community, travel can be wonderful and enriching, but I think you're really enriched perhaps by coming to accept the place where you are.
Absolutely.
And by understanding that you'll probably never know it as well as the people who are from it, but also that for me, home doesn't exist the way that it was. England of 22 years ago is a fictional place now. It's historical, and England has changed and transformed, so I'm no longer English, and there's a period in there where you don't belong in either place, and that was really interesting to explore on the page. And now there's something about learning to write that setting which has helped me pay more attention to it, which helps me even as I long for home or for England or for what that past place was, family there. Those things are gone, and so it gives me a freedom to write and explore for the next book, which will likely be set at the lake. Yeah. So I think that's all we have time for today. It's been a total pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
I'll talk to you in a little while over
Pleasure
supper.
meeting you.